Lord Snape.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, the Government is committed to supporting rail freight growth, recognising its significant economic and environmental potential and its critical role in the UK's resilience. In the last year, rail freight volumes have increased by 5%. We will support further growth through a statutory duty on Great British Railways to promote the use of rail freight, and the Secretary of State will set a rail freight growth target. My officials are working through details of the design of that target.
Grateful to the Minister for that response, but whilst welcoming the 5% increase in rail freight over the past year, we're still a long way from that 70% which was promised in the Labour Party's last election manifesto, and is still, as far as I'm aware, party policy. Does he think the move towards that happy situation will be enhanced by the current financial regime, which means that rail freight pays every year in access charges a basic rate plus RPI, whilst the road haulage industry has benefited enormously from the near 14-year freeze on the fuel tax regulator? If we're subsidising any mode of transport, my Lords, haven't we got it the wrong way round?
Taxation, as my noble friend well knows, is a matter for His Majesty's Treasury, so I won't comment further on that. But on access charges paid by freight for utilising the network, they don't currently cover the full fixed cost of operations, maintenance and renewal required. The capping arrangements, which will be in place until March 2029, will save freight operators an estimated £33 million over this 5-year control period. There are already schemes to discount access charges for new traffic, such as the Mode Shift Revenue Support Scheme and Network Rail's access charge discount policy, and in the future GBR will have greater flexibility to offer discounted charges.
Absolutely fundamental.
Will the Government assess the role that lorry trailers on rail between key points in the UK and Europe could play in increasing rail freight and reducing the wear and tear on our major highways from heavy axle weights?
The noble Baroness may know that actually that's not a new scheme, and in respect of rail freight to Europe, the Government clearly has an interest in promoting it. The Channel Tunnel has plenty of spare capacity, as does HS1. In respect of carrying lorries by rail in the UK, that has been tried before. I think it is up to the private sector freight market to develop their own flows, but the Government is there to help with access and access charges in order to get that traffic on the railway.
Entry in the register as the advisor to Hutchison Ports. I looked carefully through last week's announcement. I could not see anything in the Government's plans that would deal with the bottlenecks in the system that prevent rail freight growth. Can the Minister enlighten us as to when those might be addressed?
The noble Lord, of course, has some background in this subject, but the Government in his time wasn't able to invest significantly in increased access for freight, and the fiscal position has not allowed as much investment in that particular area as clearly the Government would like in unconstrained circumstances. Nevertheless, there are investments to be made now in the network which have been announced, like the investments in Transpennine Upgrade and in East West Rail, which will facilitate more rail freight.
Could we not repurpose other railways to carry more freight? Because clearly getting freight off the roads is absolutely urgent, especially in view of the climate crisis. What about repurposing HS2 when it's finished? Only freight.
Yeah, I think the first thing we need to do with HS2 is to finish it so it is a railway, and this Government's working very hard to do that, as was set out in the recent announcement. When HS2 is finished, it will of course allow a much greater, it will release capacity on the West Coast Main Line, at least south of Birmingham, and that capacity can be used for two purposes. One is additional passenger trains, which will enable significant growth in services and therefore more housing development in places like Milton Keynes and Bletchley, and the other is to use it for more freight traffic, and that's what will happen when HS2 opens.
Lord says that there is going to be a new use and access statement from Great British Railways when it's established in relation to freight getting access to the tracks and how much they have to pay to use them. But when is that going to be? The whole Great British Railways is still a long way off. The bill is nowhere. The whole process seems to be stalled. And in the meantime, how can he expect the freight industry to invest and plan when they have no idea what access they're going to have to the tracks in this new regime or what they're going to have to pay for them?
I meet the freight operators, both individually and collectively, and indeed I've met most of their shareholders in the last 6 months. And my current belief is that they have a very clear understanding about how the access and use policy will develop from the present policy. And in the meantime, as I mentioned, the government has at least 2 schemes to promote freight now. It's quite clear that actually if we set a rail freight increase target, then actually freight will be an integral part of the railway, and the freight community has nothing to worry about in terms of developing its market, though it is quite difficult to fit those trains onto a constrained network, which is why we need an access and use policy to be developed from the present one in order to allow it.
I wonder if the Noble Lord the Minister could tell us about the government's plans for decarbonising the rail freight sector in line with the recommendations of the Climate Change Committee.
The rail freight sector is, of course, a commercial sector with commercial organisations providing power to power freight trains. This Thursday I'm going to launch one of several new tri-mode freight locomotives from one of the operators, and a number of aspects of the government's investment plans for road and rail will allow decarbonisation of freight trains more easily than at the moment. I'll be very happy to write to the Noble Lord with some detail about that so he understands what it is that we're going to do.
Satisfied that there are enough incentives to encourage industry to install or improve access for freight?
There are clearly incentives which I've described, and in fact access for freight is continuing. Recently a new rail link was built into Horton Quarry, which is in Yorkshire off the Settle and Carlisle line, a new freight terminal at Thorney Mill, which is near West Drayton. So it is clear that developments can be made in that direction, and the discounts that I've described and the encouragement for new freight ought to be testimony to the fact that the government is keen on that happening.
My lords,
Keep going.
my lords,
My lords, it's the turn of the Conservative bench. Can you please make him one who's going to actually ask the question?
My lords, I bow to the popular will from my benches. My lords, I'm
It's out.
the popular will from my benches, I think. I'm grateful that the Noble Lord, the Minister, confirmed the 75% increase in rail freight, the target that I set in December 2023. I listened carefully to his answer where he talked about GBR, the Secretary of State, setting a target for GBR. Can I confirm that he is intending that Great British Railways will have that 75% rail freight increase or more target, and he won't set a lower one?
It's a pleasure to hear from one of the many former Secretaries of State for Transport on the other side of the House, but I can confirm that the 75% will remain. There is no intention of setting a lower target. Of course, it has to be achieved over time, which he'll know all about since he had a hand in the previous target.
My Lords, as a mere previous Minister of State for Transport, could I put to the Minister whether 75% is extremely challenging given the very compact nature of England and the relatively short journeys that are entailed compared with many of our competitors.
Very on the roads,
I would agree that 75% is quite challenging, because if you look at the island of Great Britain, the economics of rail freight work much better over thousands of miles than they do hundreds of miles. But the evidence that the rail freight grew by 5% last year is evidence that it can be done. The market is segmented into a number of areas where, like containers, aggregates and so forth, where actually progress can be made, and this government's determined to allow that to happen.